Before recycling bins, before junk removal vans, before thrift store drop-offs, before online resale, there was a person at the door asking for rags, bones, bottles, grease, and old iron. Not because they were collecting trash exactly, because in a world before disposable everything, almost nothing was only trash. An old shirt could become paper, a pile of bones could become fertilizer, glue, buttons, or bone char. A broken kettle could become scrap metal. A bottle could be washed and used again. A sack, a boot, a torn curtain, a cracked pan, a bundle of paper, a worn-out coat, all of it might still have a buyer somewhere. And between the household that wanted it gone and the mill, shop, yard, or factory that could use it, there was the rag and bone person. From a distance, the old trade can look almost charming. A horse and cart, a street call, a child trading rags for a balloon or a small toy, a figure from another time moving slowly through a village or city street. But up close, it was harder than that. It was poverty. It was skill. It was trade. It was recycling. It was survival. It was a hidden economy built out of the things other people threw away. So the real question is not only, what was a rag and bone man? The better question is, were rag and bone people recyclers, traders, scavengers, or survivors? The answer is yes. They were all of those things at once. Today, most of us experience waste as disappearance. We put something in a bin, we drag it to the curb, a truck comes, the item leaves our life. Even when we recycle, the process is divided into systems. Paper goes into one bin, bottles into another, cardboard into a stack, scrap metal to a yard, old clothes to a donation box, furniture to a pickup, and odds and ends to a thrift store or marketplace listing. Modern waste has departments. Earlier cities had people. The rag and bone trade grew out of three simple facts. Cities produced waste, industries needed material, and poor people needed ways to earn money. The rag and bone person stood in the middle. Sometimes they were a buyer, sometimes a barterer, sometimes a street finder, sometimes a cartman, sometimes a shopkeeper. Sometimes a person so poor that the only way to make a few pennies was to walk miles with a sack, searching through refuse for anything that could be sold. The phrase rag and bone man is the one that survived in memory, especially in Britain. But the trade was never only men, and it was never only rags and bones. It included women, it included children, it included older people, migrants, unemployed laborers, and people living on the edge of homelessness. It also included more established dealers, shop owners, merchants, and mills that made money from what the poorest collectors brought in. In other words, rag and bone work was not outside the economy. It was the first link in it. To understand the rag and bone trade, we have to set aside the modern assumption that worn-out things are automatically worthless. For a long time, old cloth was one of Europe's most important raw materials. Before wood pulp became dominant in papermaking, good paper was made from rags. Linen and cotton cloth could be broken down, processed, and turned into paper for books, ledgers, letters, wrappers, and documents. A worn-out shirt, a torn sheet, or an old linen garment could still have industrial value. Woolen rags had another future. In parts of West Yorkshire, old wool cloth and tailor clippings were shredded and remade into shoddy and mungo, forms of reclaimed wool used in new cloth. Around Batley, Dewsbury, Morley, Ossett, and the wider heavy woolen district, rag sorting and textile recycling became part of a serious industrial world. Bones had value too. That sounds strange now, but bones could be processed into glue, fertilizer, bone meal, handles, buttons, ornaments, and bone char. In an economy before synthetic substitutes were everywhere, bone was not just kitchen waste, it was material. Metal was even more obvious. Copper, brass, pewter, lead, old iron, broken pots, pans, tools, hinges, handles, and scrap could move into metal dealing channels. A poor collector might be looking for rags and bones, but a bit of metal could be the best find of the day. Bottles could be reused, glass could be sold. Waste paper had buyers. Old books had buyers. grease, and kitchen fat had buyers. Boots, hats, umbrellas, sacks, horsehair, bedding, canvas, carpeting, furniture, and clothes could all move somewhere. That is the first big point. The rag and bone person was not simply collecting garbage, they were collecting inventory. The city was full of material waiting to be sorted. Inside the trade, there were levels. At the bottom was the street finder. This was the person who picked through refuse, street sweepings, ash heaps, dust bins, dust holes, yards, alleys, and dumping places. They did not usually pay for what they found. They earned money only if the material could be sold afterward. In Henry Mayhew's 19th century account of London street life, the bone grubber and rag gatherer appear with a greasy sack and a stick, often tipped with a spike or hook, used to turn over dirt and refuse. These workers searched for bones, rags, scraps of metal, and anything else with resale value. Then there was the street buyer. This person went door to door or street to street and bought unwanted goods from households. Sometimes they paid cash. Sometimes they traded small items. Later, memories of the trade often include balloons, rubbing stones, toys, paper windmills, or even goldfish exchanged for rags and scrap. That barter is one reason the trade lives in memory as something colorful. But it also became a public health concern. In Britain, laws later restricted rag and bone merchants from giving food, drink, toys, or other articles to children while collecting rags or old clothes, because old textiles and refuse were seen as possible disease carriers. The distinction matters. The finder lived by chance. The buyer operated closer to a small trading business. And above both were the shops, dealers, yards, merchants, mills, and manufacturers that could store, sort, process, and resell material at a larger scale. The rag and bone trade was not one job. It was a ladder, and the people at the bottom often carried the heaviest weight for the least money. The clearest window into Victorian rag and bone work comes from Henry Mayhew's London Labour and the London Poor. Mayhew was a remarkable collector of street testimony, but he was also a man of his time. His writing can carry Victorian class prejudice, so we should use him carefully, not as a perfect narrator, but as a witness who recorded details we might otherwise never have. In Mayhew's London, he estimated there were roughly 800 to 1,000 bone grubbers and rag gatherers. Many began before dawn. That was partly because each worker had a route, or beat. If someone else got there first, the best finds might be gone. A bone grubber might cover a district reaching from central London out into outer districts and suburbs. The walking alone could be brutal. Mayhew describes routes that could take 7 to 9 hours and cover 20 to 30 miles in a day. Imagine that kind of day. Not walking for pleasure, not walking with a clean bag and good shoes. Walking through poor streets, alleys, dust heaps, refuse, and back roads, carrying a greasy sack, turning over filth with a stick, looking for the smallest bits of value. Once the bag had enough in it, the work was still not over. Rags had to be sorted. White rags were better than dirty colored rags. Canvas and sacking were separated. Bones went in one category, metal in another. Wet rags were a problem because dry rags were worth more. A rainy day could damage the best material in the bag. The pay was painfully small. Mayhew reported that a very good day for a bone grubber might be about 8 pence. Some very old or very young workers earned only 2 or 3 pence. Average earnings might be 6 to 8 pence a day, or 3 to 4 shillings a week. And yet the total amount of material moved was enormous. Mayhew tried to calculate the trade in London and estimated millions of pounds of bones and rags gathered in a year. The individual worker was poor. The system above them was not small. That is one of the strange truths of the trade. From the street level, it looked like desperate scavenging. From the industrial level, it was supply. Once the collector had a sack, cart, or bundle of material, the next step was sale. Rag and bone people sold to rag shops, rag and bottle shops, marine store dealers, old metal dealers, bone mills, rag merchants, paper makers, textile mills, foundries, and other buyers. Marine store dealer is a misleading term. It sounds like rope, sails, anchors, and ships. But in practice, these shops often bought almost anything saleable. Bottles, bones, broken glass, copper, brass, pewter, lead, iron, zinc, old books, waste paper, horsehair, mattresses, clothing, furniture, kitchen grease, and odd household goods. Some items were reused as objects. Others were reduced back into raw material. An old coat might become secondhand clothing, or it might become rag stock. A bottle might be washed and sold again. Broken glass might go to a dealer. Bones might go to a mill. Metal might be weighed and sold onward. Paper and cloth might move toward industry. The collector's advantage was not capital. It was movement. They knew the streets. They knew the calls. They knew which households might have cast-offs. They knew what a buyer might pay. They knew how to sort a sack fast enough to get some money by the end of the day. But the dealer had scale. A shop had storage, a merchant had contacts, a mill had machinery, a factory had demand. So the rag and bone person at the bottom took the dirt, the walking, the weather, the smell, the stigma, and the risk. The higher levels could capture more of the value. That does not mean every relationship in the trade was simple exploitation. Some collectors built routes, carts, shops, and regular customer relationships. Some became small traders. Some families stayed in the trade for years. But it does remind us that reuse economies are still economies. Someone always does the sorting. Someone always touches the dirty material first. And in the rag and bone world, that person was often the poorest person in the chain. The phrase rag and bone man is useful, but it hides a lot. Women and children were part of this world. Mayhew described many street finders as old men, old women, and very young children. He also noted that after the Irish famine, Irish boys and girls were among those gathering bones and rags in London streets. In the broader waste economy, women and children appear again and again as rag gatherers, mudlarks, dust yard sifters, sorters, family helpers, and mill workers. In the shoddy and Mungo textile districts of West Yorkshire, women often worked as rag sorters. Sorting was not incidental. It was skilled, necessary, and unpleasant work. Rags had to be separated by fiber, quality, color, cleanliness, and future use. A pile of old cloth was not useful until someone made sense of it. Children were drawn into the trade for the same reason children appear throughout 19th century labor history: poverty. Poor children could gather bones and rags. They could trade them for small goods. They could work around mills and sorting rooms. They could help family members who were collecting or dealing. It is tempting to make the child with the balloon the emotional image of the rag and bone trade, but we have to be careful. That image is memorable because it is sweet. The reality behind it is not sweet. Children were involved because families needed income, because informal work had few protections, and because society accepted levels of child labor we should not romanticize. If this story is about second chances for objects, it is also about how rarely poor workers were given second chances themselves. Were rag and bone people homeless? Some were not. Many lived somewhere in between. Mayhew wrote that the bone grubbers and rag gatherers he observed often led wandering, unsettled lives. Many had no fixed place of abode. He estimated that at least half of the London bone grubbers and rag gatherers slept in cheap lodging houses. Others lived in garrets or poor rooms in the lowest neighborhoods. He also described seasonal trampers who came into London during winter, using night refugees or straw yards for shelter and bread, then gathering bones and rags during the day. When those shelters closed, they might leave the city again, returning to casual labor, begging, haymaking, or other forms of survival. But not every person connected to the trade was homeless. Some street buyers had regular routes. Some later collectors had handcarts, pony carts, horses, yards, or homes. Some shopkeepers and marine store dealers occupied a more stable layer of the trade. Some 20th century rag and bone men were family men with known rounds and repeat customers. So the honest answer is layered. At the poorest end, many were homeless or close to it. In the middle, some had lodgings, but little security. At the top, Some became dealers, traders, or shopkeepers. The rag and bone world had its own class system. And the figure we remember most clearly, the lone collector with a sack or cart, was often the person with the least protection. Rag and bone people lived inside a contradiction. They performed useful work. They also handled the things other people did not want to touch. They reduced waste. They supplied industries. They helped poor households turn cast-offs into cash or trade goods. They made second-hand goods available. They recovered material before modern recycling had a name. But they were often looked down on. The work smelled. The clothing was dirty. The roots moved through alleys, dust heaps, markets, and poor districts. A collector might appear at the edge of respectable homes asking for unwanted goods or turn over refuse in public. That kind of work invites suspicion. Rag shops and marine store shops could be accused of encouraging theft, especially if servants, children, or desperate people sold household goods they were not supposed to sell. Public health officials worried about disease. Municipal authorities wanted cleaner streets and more controlled waste systems. So rag and bone workers were both needed and distrusted. That tension has not disappeared. Modern society still depends on people who collect, sort, haul, clean, scrap, salvage, and process what others discard. But the more dirty or dangerous the work is, the easier it becomes for everyone else to look away. The old rag and bone trade makes that visible. It asks a hard question. What happens when a society needs a kind of work, but refuses to honor the people doing it? The rag and bone trade did not end all at once. It changed. Municipal trash collection expanded, public health regulation increased, covered bins, official waste services, council dumps, and later recycling centers changed who had access to discarded material. Papermaking changed too. Once wood pulp became dominant, the demand for cloth rags as paper stock declined. Textile manufacturing changed. Synthetic materials became more common. Bone substitutes and new industrial process changed the market for bones. Household goods changed. Packaging changed. The value of different cast-offs rose and fell. The horse and cart gradually gave way to the handcart, then the van, then the licensed scrap collector. The old call of rags and bones survived in altered form as any old iron. Scrap metal remained valuable. In some places, rising scrap prices brought modern collectors back onto streets, now with vans and loudspeakers instead of horses and bells. But the old rag and bone figure had largely faded by the late 20th century. This is important. The trade did not disappear because reuse stopped mattering. It disappeared because reuse was reorganized. Some of it moved into municipal systems, some into regulated scrap yards, some into charity shops, some into recycling centers, some into global used clothing markets, some into junk removal, some into resale platforms, some into informal waste picking in other parts of the world. The work remained. The costume changed. There is no single modern equivalent to the rag and bone person because the old role has been split into many jobs. The clearest descendant in Britain is the scrap metal collector, the person with a van collecting old appliances, metal, radiators, bikes, bed frames, tools, and other scrap. Today that world is regulated. Scrap metal dealers and mobile collectors need licenses and records, partly because metal theft became a serious concern. But the comparison is wider than scrap. Junk haulers are part of it. House clearance crews are part of it. Estate sale pickers, flea market buyers, thrift store sorters, textile recyclers, bottle and can collectors, curbside salvagers, storage unit buyers, auction resellers and online marketplace sellers all carry pieces of the old role. Globally, the strongest comparison is the informal waste picker. Millions of people around the world still earn a living by collecting, sorting, and selling recyclable material. They recover plastics, paper, cardboard, metal, textiles, and other saleable goods from streets, businesses, landfills, and waste sites. Modern organizations describe waste pickers as essential to recycling systems, especially where formal waste collection does not reach everything. At the same time, they often face contaminated materials, injury, weak bargaining power, unstable income, poverty, and lack of legal protection. That should sound familiar. The old rag and bone world has not vanished. It has been renamed, regulated, mechanized, outsourced, formalized, or pushed to the margins. For rag and rust, the connection is more specific and more careful. Rag and rust is not a Victorian rag and bone trade. It is not the same hardship. It is not the same poverty. It is not the same danger. But the name belongs to the same old instinct. Look again. That thing someone dismissed might still have use. It might have history. It might have beauty. It might have a story worth telling. So, did rag and bone people do good? Yes. But the answer needs care. They did good in material terms. They kept usable goods out of waste streams. They supplied paper mills, textile mills, bone mills, metal dealers, second-hand shops, and manufacturing systems. They reduced some street and household refuse. They helped poor households turn cast-offs into money or trade. They made cheap goods available through second-hand channels. They practiced a circular economy long before anyone used that phrase. They did good in social terms too, at least when the system worked. They created survival income for people excluded from regular employment. They gave value to things that would otherwise be lost. They built roots, relationships, and small trades out of almost nothing. But we should not make the mistake of turning hardship into romance. The system also reflected harm. It relied on poverty and desperation. It exposed workers to disease, injury, filth, cold, hunger, and exhaustion. It involved child labor. It could involve exploitative middlemen. It treated useful workers as dirty, low, or suspicious. It pushed the worst risks onto people with the least power. So the cleanest answer is this: their labor was good. Their conditions often were not. Rag and bone people were doing necessary, valuable recovery work inside an unjust system. That is the part worth remembering. There is a reason this history feels close to rag and rust. Not because we are living the same life. We are not. Not because the old trade was cute. It was not. And not because every discarded thing is treasure. It is not. But because the old rag and bone world understood something modern culture keeps forgetting. Value is not always obvious at first glance. Sometimes value is hidden under dust. Sometimes it is buried in a box. Sometimes it is sitting in a storage unit, separated from the person who once used it, waiting for someone to notice. A rag could become paper. A bone could become fertilizer. A bottle could be used again. A broken metal object could become raw material. A forgotten household item could become part of someone else's home. That does not erase the hardship of the people who did the work. If anything, it should make us more respectful of them. The rag and bone people were not just old-time characters calling through the street. They were workers in the first rough version of a recycling economy. They were traders. They were sorters. They were survivors. They were people who saw that the line between waste and worth is not fixed. And that might be the lesson to carry forward. The past was not better because everything was reused. The past shows us that reuse has always depended on people willing to look closely. Sometimes those people were respected. Often, they were not. But the work mattered, because the first person to see value in a discarded thing changes its future. And sometimes the difference between waste and worth is simply that someone stopped long enough to look. So maybe the question is not only what the rag and bone people were. Maybe the question is, what part of that work still belongs to us? Are you the person who throws something away without a second thought? Or are you the person who pauses, turns it over, asks where it came from, what it was used for, and whether it still has another life waiting inside it? That is the spirit behind rag and rust. We are not recreating the old trade. We are not pretending the hardship was romantic, but we are trying to carry forward the better part of the lesson. Look closer, waste less, recover the story, and give useful things another chance to matter. If that way of seeing the world speaks to you, then maybe you are part of this too. Maybe you are a rag and ruster. This has been a Rag and Rust production. Follow along for more stories from the things we find, the histories hiding inside them, and the behind-the-scenes work of bringing forgotten objects back into view. Thank you for watching.